Straight.
Welcome to today's episode of Heels in the Hierarchy. I'm SJ.
And I'm Pegsy.
So step inside an episode of Heels in the Hierarchy, empowering women without stepping on toes.
Good morning.
Hi. Sounds a bit weird. Hi. Yeah, I'm so excited about doing this episode today. So one of the things that our listeners may or may not recall, do you remember one of our first episodes, we talked about how we met, some of the differences, and I've been every so often talked about the strengths that we have about the quirk. I would say quirks around us being both neurodiverse, but we've never really talked about it in depth. So today we're going to be talking about. My brain just went about your neurodiverse, but I think it's important because when we're talking about women in leadership, when we've been talking about work, one of the things that we do or what we have to develop doing a podcast is learning how we learn both together, but also learning all the technologies. And I think we've just got to know each other's strengths, weaknesses, quirks, neurodiversity so well that it'd be really lovely to share. And hopefully our listeners will really be able to learn more about your story and how it's impacted you, but more about the reality of living with a condition. And I'm being deliberate not to say it because I think it's really nice that it's your story and what it is. So one of the things is, what's the one thing that really changed everything for you when you're thinking about being neurodiverse?
So I have ADHD and I am late diagnosed ADHD. I was diagnosed with my ADHD officially just this year, having taken 2 full years on that journey to diagnosis and probably about 3 or 4 months beforehand. I think when SJ tells her story, your neurodivergence you were aware of at a much younger age. And the reason I mention the age difference, I
think you're right. I think because there is a lot. I mean, I don't know in terms of these facts themselves, but there is especially in women, a later diagnosis specifically around ADHD, isn't there?
Yeah.
So I think it is important because it does impact looking back in your story.
Yeah, and I think also, I guess, to sort of, eventually, this is a sign of ADHD, but to eventually get round and answer the bloody question is the fact that I didn't know that I was living with ADHD. So I have only been living with ADHD for about the last 2 years and only officially since last month.
Wow. But we've had conversations way before this around that. You just had that. This is going to be a really interesting episode because we're so specifically focused on our neurodivergence. I'm so aware of my own. And it's okay if we go around the houses because I think that's, we are focusing on how it impacts both of us and how we interact. And we both have different diagnoses. So therefore, it's an ADHD mixing with a dyslexic who goes easily tangents and loses train of thought, and you're complete opposite. So we'll get there. I think it's quite funny in a way, but also I think that's what makes us in terms of how we work, how we kind of get things done. And I think there's so many more strengths. But it's interesting you saying about you've been living with for the last 2 years, but actually diagnosis or not diagnosis, it has been your way of seeing the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
but I didn't know that I'd got it. And in a way, this is why it's really important, I think, for me to share my story about the impact of late diagnosis, because we have talked quite openly about various quirks that I've had. But I would say that the words that I say, the life that I live, and the dual narrative of the life in my head, they are absolutely poles apart. And so for over 60 years, but less than that, I guess, because what age are you when you get your consciousness? But for most of the life that I can recall, I kind of feel that my life is lived on skis. That
Oh, interesting.
one of the skis is the person that you see and that you interact with, and then the other person is the other skis, that's the person inside my head that is there all the time, talking all the time. And, a mutual acquaintance of ours in a different context talks about trying to hold a beach ball underwater. And I would say that that is what my other ski is about, is that all the time I'm holding the right ski under the water.
I think that's what's going to be. I think that's what's most relatable because that's a great visual, but also I think there's so many people who do live inside their heads.
Yeah.
But actually, what's lovely about having this conversation is enabling other people to really see what your lived experience has been. What was the moment that you went, oh crap, maybe I do need to look into it?
Yeah.
Because obviously
Yeah.
living with this, going, what's going on, to then suddenly realizing self-awareness around, oh, maybe there is something else that's not
Yeah.
just my experience.
Yeah.
That's what's caused the effect for you to kind of get a diagnosis, hasn't it?
Yeah. So the way I lived until I started to think, do I have ADHD, was massively challenging and a massive burden on me. But that was my normal. As much as I knew, in air quotes, that I wasn't normal the way that I perceived other people to be, that was my normal in being not normal. So I didn't necessarily go searching for a diagnosis. I came up with the realization that I might have ADHD through a weird quirk of fate. I was coaching somebody who was in their early 30s, a young male who was sharing with me some of the challenges they had of being diagnosed with dyslexia when they were at university. And that there was kind of like this sudden eureka moment and that sort of thing for them. And we chatted through in the coaching sessions at various times about how that affected them. And I wanted this guy to see the potential and the opportunities that he would have by accepting and working with his dyslexia. And I thought it would be quite interesting for him to do a bit of a test, almost like a psychometric, on how you see yourself. And I thought, I can't in good conscience ask him to do this test if I haven't done the test, first of all. And it was never going to be a properly scientific test, but it was always going to be a bit of a test that said what kind of,
So it's like more out of
dyslexia have you got.
curiosity to kind of support him on his coaching journey. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did this dyslexia test, knowing that I didn't have dyslexia. And at the end of it, the test results were, you might have dyslexia, but we don't think so. But you might have ADHD. And it's kind of like, yeah, of course not. And I remember discussing with the coachee that, these were the test results.
Did you share about yours?
Yeah, with my test results, and not in that sort of like next session, but when we were sort of talking about things afterwards. Anyway, I then started to have a look at some assessments for ADHD because I thought, it's interesting. There are some things in the test results that are a bit like me, but I'd always lived with this twin in my head. So, as I said, there was no reason to go and look for any diagnosis. I was just a weird human being. So I didn't need a test to give me a condition that other people who had a genuine condition might need to have a test for, if that makes sense.
But you didn't know it was a genuine.
I didn't know. I didn't know I got it.
What your experience. Yeah. You just thought that this is how you experience the life around you. But also, like, not going back to the age perspective, but what I find fascinating is how open we are now about talking about,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
the differences. Whereas my curiosity is taking you this long, not just because of the culture or because of your experience, because there wasn't anything available.
Yeah.
So you've just had to navigate, which I find fascinating how strong women are and yourself has been to navigate a world of work and family life, not knowing of a condition, but having to overcome anyway.
Yeah. But also, I hadn't realized until I started doing the research for myself that I had spent a lifetime masking.
Yes, exactly. That's the word. Yeah.
And it was
Sounds exhausting.
exhausting, but it was my way of developing coping strategies with not being normal. This was like my worldview because I didn't know I'd got ADHD. So how did I develop strategies to cope with not being normal, but pretending to the world that I was normal? And then subsequently finding out that this was something called masking. For me, it was just a coping strategy so that I could be friends with people, that I could survive in the world. I remember saying to a friend of mine, I work really hard. I work really hard to be liked by people. I work really hard. And my friend was really shocked by this. And she sort of said, this must be really exhausting. And I said, but I need to be liked by people. And the reason that I kind of said that to her and got defensive about it was I now realise it was because I'd got this twin horrible person in my head. So why would anyone like me? So if I could be a nice person, if I could be liked, then I'd become a normal person again. Gosh, I haven't expected this.
No, but I
Think about my makeup.
no, this is the reality, though, isn't it? And this is the thing that I think our listeners will resonate with is that unless we voice the things that we felt we've not been able to voice before, the things that are happening in our minds and how having ADHD and how the exhaustion of trying to function, and we've talked about so many times about this gingerbread mole, and it's something that's so underlining and so subtle, but so infectious in a workplace, for example, that you navigate what is, I don't want to keep saying normal, but the functioning world.
Yeah.
But when your brain is, and it's not about, and I think part of it is that fear when you talked about it, it was like that fear of not being liked and you needed to persuade people over because they might find out what was going on in your mind. That fear is what causes you to mask, but then actually the masking is the energy that you're causing yourself to do. And then it might all unravel when you're kind of in a different place.
Yeah.
And how has all of that kind of looking back gone, this is what I've been holding.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was holding for such a long time.
And it's kind of like every single year I was holding another boulder on my shoulders because there was another year of me like not being normal. And as I say, this is how I felt, and I am putting this all in air quotes. Since my diagnosis, and I have begun to understand for me what the symptoms are and how they manifest themselves, I can now go, oh, God's sake, that's my ADHD.
Yeah.
Duh. And it is so much more liberating, unquestionably.
Do you feel that's had
Unquestionably.
some healing in terms of being able to name that it's not actually that person, it's not you, it's actually this is how your brain has been wired?
Yeah, there's a yes, but. So I would say it has been freeing and liberating. The yes, but I guess is that it's liberating in my head, but I am very cautious with a number of people that I will share that I've got ADHD with and put a particular behavior down to being my ADHD, because people of my generation can't wrap their head around how an increasing number of women are being diagnosed with ADHD. Will say things like, well, of course, we're all on the spectrum, which
how do you feel about when people
that does my head in? Well, I think there's a subtle difference between neurodivergence and neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is we are all neurodiverse. The neurodivergent is that you are somewhat to the left or to the right of the bell-shaped curve. And it's the neurodivergence that you and I both have, because everyone has neurodiversity because we're all individuals. So I'm cautious about saying to somebody, I'm like that because of my ADHD, because I do see in a lot of, especially women friends of my age, an eye roll. Whereas if I was to say it to somebody of your generation and younger, I know I would get much more empathy because it's becoming more openly discussed and better understood by your generations.
This says something around, though, it's ignorance versus knowledge. So it's the fact that it's not a bit like this is not a new thing. It's not a new diagnosis. It's just this is the only generation that's had enough research to show how the brain and how we learn has been able to say this is a condition.
Yeah.
Not that you didn't have it when you were growing up.
Yeah.
It's just that it was a different culture and generation where certain things were never discussed or explored, and we didn't have the technology to be able to do the research and the scientists and all the things that we have now, for example. But that doesn't take away the sense that sometimes I sit with is although there is that part that I can hear that is finally you've got a diagnosis, is the damage and the years that you've had to hold and mask and just be with this experience that is I feel so lonely.
Yeah.
You know, and having to then excuse or have to not almost perform with the masking, isn't it? But the impact that has on you going, well, what do you do with all that stuff? Now that it's liberating, but my heart breaks for the fact that you've had to go through the experience of feeling a certain way, which wasn't real because you had a condition that was never discovered. Yeah.
But also only boys had ADHD.
Exactly.
And actually only boys from probably the 1980s onward had ADHD, because ADHD wasn't a thing until I was sort of 25 or 30. So the boys who had ADHD were our children. So
again, that's all to do with how research was
made
and and who funded that, and then impacts the fact that then you ignore the fact that it had any connection to you being a female or anything. But you continued that narrative that this is a me experience.
Yeah, because
not because anything else.
Because I didn't know ADHD was a thing for a long time, and I didn't know ADHD was a thing that could affect girls for a long time. So I never spoke about it. I internalized an awful lot of things. And as I say, I masked a lot without realizing that I was masking. When I started to twig that I'd got ADHD, I did grieve. And then I thought I can spend a long time grieving and being resentful. I think if you could pick my parents up and put them in the 2000s, my parents would have been supportive. They would have potentially seen signs. And I would have then known in my mind what my mind was like. And that would have been very liberating. So my grieving was for all of the bad decisions that I made, all of the choices that I wish I could go back and make, knowing that I'd got ADHD, all of the frustrations and where anger manifested itself. And that grieving process really genuinely wasn't long, because I thought I could, here's another rabbit hole to go down if I'm not careful. I've got my diagnosis. I can now rationalize things. And life is just so much easier to say, that'll be the ADHD then.
So you feel like you're a kinder self. So the other self that was very self-loathing part, has that shifted for you to be kinder to yourself because of knowing that it's not actually you, it's the way that you function? in the
Yeah.
way that you interpret the world. So you're embracing that part of yourself rather
Yeah.
than trying to change it or mask it and
Yeah.
work with that.
And I have found that really helpful and liberating. Some of the symptoms of ADHD that I've found really funny, and it's kind of like, oh, duh, I know why I do that's an ADHD
So what's your quirks? What's
symptoms.
your top 3 quirks that you've realised
So
that
some of them are just weird, like
quirky, not
quirky,
weird?
quirky.
We have to be so careful with language, especially when we've done it. What's your
Uh,
quirks and special powers?
so one of them is that I frequently confuse left and right. So if you are ever in a car with me and I'm giving you directions,
Go
if
with
I
me.
say if I say turn left, watch what my hand is doing, because if it's my right hand and I say go left, I really mean turn right. I rationalize that to the fact that my auntie shut my finger in a car door when I was 2 or 3 years old. I was a right-handed child and I became left-handed because of this injury to my hand. I was protecting my hand. It was the time I was starting to learn to write, so it was easier for me to use my left hand, and
Oh
it
wow.
just became a habit. But I thought I confused being between left and right
Yeah.
to being because of that injury, but actually it's a trait of ADHD, and I can kind of go,
Yes,
"Well, who
you
knew?"
try to analyse yourself, but
Yeah,
analysed it
and
wrong.
blamed my aunt for years, but yeah, I didn't realise that was a thing.
Good job we've got good sat navs and good friends with good directions, or just watch what your your body's doing in terms of that. Okay. What else do you have
Other
next?
things, this drives me nuts, but I often make mistakes in filling in forms. So in my brain, it's like, this is a really serious form. You cannot make any mistakes. You must do it in black pen. I'll pick up blue pen. I've said in my brain, pick up the black pen. Why have you picked up
He's
the
self-sabotaging.
blue pen? So there is self-sabotaging, and it's really interesting because these ones are some of the funnier ones, but that can get in your head. And yet I will say to myself, you stupid person, for goodness sake, you knew you were supposed to pick up a black pen. Why have you picked up a blue pen? You know that this is a really serious form you cannot make any mistakes with. Like when a friend of mine asked for me to help with her application to become a British citizen, and I got my name wrong. Now, you cannot imagine the explosion of anger in my head, because she'd asked me to do this really beautiful thing for her, and I stuffed up her form.
But then that goes back to you know, hearing how angry and upset you are in yourself. So you go back into
Yeah,
internalizing that
I can't get
self-loathing
anything right,
rather
and
than,
yeah.
okay, double check it. Have you put any techniques with things like that?
Well, now I would just think, that's my ADHD. You can't help it. I talk excessively. Who knew? Um, I eat fast. Uh, I have dyscalculia.
What does that mean?
That's where you sometimes get your numbers back to front. So
Okay.
you'd say 3-7 and you'd write 7-3.
And that's really interesting because I think some as you're talking, and I think this is potentially, and I'm obviously not a scientist in any way, shape, or form, why some people get misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Because as you're saying it, I'm like, oh, that's a bit dyslexic. That's a bit
Yeah.
dyslexic. Certain
Yeah.
things that I do. So that'll be really interesting to think about when we do the next episode. But okay, what
And
are the
also,
symptoms?
I have a mouth guard. And apparently, people with ADHD can often clench their teeth at night.
Mhm.
Who knew? So it was kind of like, oh, okay. And it was these little
Is
tiny
that
things,
tension, do you think? From in terms of your, because you talked about your mind
potentially.
being on so
Yeah.
on hyperdrive,
Yeah.
that it's like a systematic,
Yeah. You hold
like
the tension in your
you're trying to figure out and
jaw.
trying to do it.
So those were some of the quirky things. How it affected me somewhat differently in sort of more impactfully in my life was about self-image, that not only the needing people to like me and working hard, but the massive self-loathing that I have around how I look, how I present, how I, just my overall body image.
Has that impacted at work as well then? Would you spend more time analysing what you're going into work? Not necessarily your job, but literally why you're wearing certain
Yeah.
things or doing it. Would you
Yeah.
spend a lot more time then
Yeah.
trying to almost justify to yourself why you're doing something
Yeah.
before you're going to work?
Yeah.
So again, before you've gone that, your battery's starting to drain.
Absolutely. Because I live my life as not worthy. So every action I do is to build up from the starting position when I wake up of not worthy, and then I build and I build and I build. So I will build by, washing and dressing, but making sure that if I choose an outfit, that it's mostly that I'm dressed for what I perceive to be a successful person to look like. Because if I'm in a senior role, I need to look like a senior person. Have once worn jeans to work. I would rather pay the money on jeans for jeans day than go into work in jeans because of a self-loathing in my body image, but also it's not professional for me to be seen in jeans. And even though there might be a female director in jeans, she's a director and she's got a lovely figure. So, of course, she can get away with wearing jeans. Whereas I'm not a director and I've got a terrible figure, so I'm not wearing jeans, have this money. So I kind of had that. And again, this is kind of like masking, but masking in a very sort of intentional way.
So you're aware of what's happening, but you can't seem to stop that thinking pattern in terms of doing it. And you've talked about like when we've gone out of off air, when you go through a rabbit hole and things like that. Is that some of your thinking process? You have a thought and then you just keep going down that thought, because that's something that you obviously, in terms of a symptom, we've talked about is that you would then, two things that I've noticed as we've been working together that I think is one of your great strengths, because I babble, you go into detail. I'm not a detailed person, but you can really focus on hyper-focus on something and you'll get the job done.
Yeah.
Whereas I will go all around the houses and try and be creative about stuff. So we all have our different ways.
Yeah.
So things, when I hear you say, is so saddening to want, for myself to hear, but also this is why it's so important to talk about.
Yeah.
Because actually it has such an impact of you as your identity and who you are, but also in terms of the workplace, to be so self-aware of how we interact with other women.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what their story is. We don't know what they're going through. And if you're aware that actually this is an internal process with especially with women with ADHD, that is a overthinking, over-analysing. We have to be so careful that we're so gentle in our words with other people. Have you noticed a shift with when you're interacting with other people in the workplace, or how you've managed women, knowing how you know what you know now?
I think I've always been very strong on empathy. So I think that the women I've managed, I've done my very best to be empathetic towards as being a manager in terms of their different personalities and their different ways of working. I think I could have been a better manager if I'd have known I'd got ADHD sooner. But I know for certain I would have been a better employee if I'd have known that I'd got ADHD sooner. So an example would be the one-to-one. I would have a one-to-one with my team member. I would be very empathetic to any of the challenges that they had. I think we've spoken about it in a previous podcast where I talked about including a well-being barometer in their ADHD in their Freudian slip, in their one-to-one notes. I always made sure that they had a copy of their one-to-one notes so that when they saw me writing away or typing away, they wouldn't wonder what I was writing, because I knew that in my head, I was wondering what my boss was writing about me in my one-to-one, and I never got a copy of the notes. So I had always utilized my internal struggles to the benefit of the staff that I managed. But one of the things I learned quite recently is that people with ADHD catastrophize. And again, I kind of knew that. I knew that I catastrophized, but I would go into a one-to-one with my boss and I would expect to get sacked, or I'd expect to get a ticking off of something that I hadn't done. So hadn't done well,
But that just sounds like that would then reinforce your self-loathing. So this is what I expected.
Yeah.
And then you've got that loop that just keeps going.
Yeah.
Which then keeps you in that state of self-loathing and high performance, because then you're trying to prove. So in that sense, not only is it exhausting, but it's quite, it can go down a very anxiety, depressive state if you keep going through that.
I would train people as managers and in sort of well-being courses and things like that about the real importance of seeing feedback as a golden nugget, something to see positively, look for my loving intentions and all those sorts of things. I would go into my one-to-one expecting to get ticked off and being defensive, because the only reason I was going there was to get told off. So there was always as well a contrast between what I was saying and what was going on in my head. And so I would also resign from jobs, shocking people I worked with that I was leaving. But I would resign from jobs because I already knew that they knew I was rubbish at my job and they were going to sack me. So I'd just as well go before I was pushed. Because again, the creativity in my brain, that is an absolute strength and that I have really utilized to good effect throughout my professional life, is there. The counter to that is that my ability to come up with creative thinking out of the box solutions is also my ability to already conclude what the outcome is going to be of any discussion I'm going to have with somebody senior to me, because of course they're far better than me, they're far more intelligent than me, they're far more professional than me, yada 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 is in my head. So I see the writing on the wall and therefore I'm going to resign. And I've frequently resigned without another job to go to, because I know what's going to happen. You're going to sack me eventually, and I'm not going to dignify you with getting in with that conclusion first. So I'm going to resign.
Have you ever regretted that?
Oh,
knowing what
so many times. Except that I can't have too much regret about it, because
you're assuming again, aren't you? It's fascinating to me because so many points thing you said is kind of, oh, I resonate with that and I resonate with that. But also I know the weight that it carries in terms of you've got to live with yourself. So nobody sees what you're living with. They just see, like you're saying, regardless if you're masking or not, it's always a perception of what they see, not necessarily the truth, because we all come from our own world views and perspectives and so what we see is our own projection of what they want you to see. We all play these masking games. One of the things that fascinated me is knowing what you know now and being able to encourage people to then, doesn't matter what age they are, to go and seek diagnosis. Talk me through that. Like, what was it like for you to finally go and have a test? What would that feel like? What did it look like?
So the first thing that I did was I was conscious that I could go down a rabbit hole. So I hyper-focused on being objective and looking at in a whole bunch of places for either confirmation, or whatever the opposite of confirmation is, that I've either got ADHD or I haven't. So I did a number of different tests, and then I considered, and I chose the tests from locations online that I thought were going to be authentic and honest, not just a sort of like something on Facebook, have you got ADHD or not? So I tried to find organizations that were ADHD related organizations. So I did a number of these tests, and that began to be liberating, because it's kind of like, that's interesting. I never thought about that. Oh, yes, or definitely not. I don't have whatever that one thing is. And of course, the thing about all of these neurodivergent conditions is that they present to everybody who has them in different ways. So for me, there were the bulk of them that matched and a small percentage that didn't. Then I knew that I needed to go one of two ways. I could either get a private diagnosis and medication, or I could get an NHS related diagnosis. And so I looked at the private one and I considered that there could be a financial motivation in confirming that people have ADHD.
Okay.
And I chose not to go down that route. And I felt that I would be validated if my diagnosis came through the NHS. So I went to my GP to get an ADHD assessment. I was asked, I think, 3 questions, maybe 5 questions. And at the end, the person told me that I did not have ADHD. And I was angry
The
beyond
GP or
belief.
the...
No, this was a mental health nurse.
Yeah.
And some of the questions were, what's your childhood like? And I thought, I don't know what answer you want, but it was kind of what I think was normal because it was my childhood. Are you asking me if my childhood was violent or aggressive? Are you asking, what question?
What are you asking behind the question?
Yeah. What answer are you looking for? Are you impulsive? Well, yeah, I guess I am, but isn't everyone sometimes? What do you mean by impulsive? I mean, sometimes I'll go and buy myself a dress and I haven't really got enough money to afford to buy the dress. But at the same time, I don't run out in front of cars on the M1 stark naked. What do you mean by impulsive? And this whole diagnosis took 20 minutes and I was angry for 19 3/4 of those minutes. And then at the end of that, for him to turn around and say, I don't think you've got ADHD, after all of the focus that I'd had and all of the research that I'd done myself, and I'd reached that conclusion objectively, I was absolutely fuming. So we sort of left it there, and I was distraught. And I've, phoned a close family friend and I explained to her what the situation was, and she was going on her own journey to see whether or not she'd got autism. And she knows me incredibly well, and she was just very calming and said, you don't have to accept that diagnosis. You can go back and demand a second opinion on the NHS. And it was like, phew. So I went I made a physical appointment to go and see a doctor. And I went, I object to this diagnosis and here's why. Then I got another assessment. And by now there was a good sort of 3 to 6 month delay in me asking for a second opinion and getting this initial assessment. And the conclusion from that person was, we think you've got ADHD.
And then what happened in that moment?
And I felt really validated, especially since that experience with this other person. They said you need to get a professional diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And that could take up to 5 years. Initially, I think this was around 2021, 22 that I'd sort of started on this journey of discovery. And as I say, I didn't have the interview with the person and I got the official diagnosis. And even though the psychiatrist had said to me in our meeting, I wasn't certain that they would honestly put that in the report until I actually physically received the report in black and white, because I've kind of regressed to the discussion that I'd had with the mental health nurse, because I was answering questions and I wasn't sure I was giving them all the right information, the psychiatrist. So almost like, did I pass
It's a lot
as
of
being an
pressure because,
ADHD?
this is something you put a lot of your hopes on
Yeah.
to explain so many things
Yeah,
that you've
to
read.
explain over 60 years worth of my life.
But when you've had someone who said the opposite to that and really
Yeah.
squashed that, then you
Yeah.
start question every little thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if in that moment you're infuriated because you know you're right, that thought pattern just all brings it back up again. So my thinking really, out of all of that experience, what would be your leaving thoughts in terms of your experience as a woman with ADHD? If anyone that's listening that's probably thinking about, oh, this resonates with me, and also like anything you want to kind of encourage our listeners or what you'd want to share. And also with the other head, if someone's in a workplace, how can they be more supportive or thinking about it?
I it, it's a really difficult one to answer, actually. I am pleased that I got a diagnosis, because I think the burden of continuing to live my life, how I was living my life up until that point, was exhausting. And it's become less exhausting since. I have been aware of many strengths that I've got, which I now know are ADHD strengths. And I wish I'd have known that they were genuine strengths, but almost with any strength, if you imagine it as a coin, there's a head and there's a tail. So for every strength I'd got, I was aware of another character trait that at times could be limiting. And I wish I'd have known that that was the counter to the strength, simply because I would almost appreciate the counter to the strength more, rather than I am a complete waste of space and I've got some strengths. Does that sort of make sense? So I think there was that. The other thing was, I found a fantastic document that you can provide to your line manager that tells them about some of the character traits of people with ADHD and how they can support you. And the reason I gave it to my manager at the time, who was absolutely brilliant, was that I knew that she would understand where I was coming from and be empathetic to my ADHD diagnosis and manage me accordingly. And also, if a member of my team had come up to me with that diagnosis, even though I hadn't had my own at the time, I would have been very grateful for them to share that with me. And I would have, again, made an effort to understand their challenges and opportunities and supported them in that way as well.
So there's kind of so many things in that conversation, but some of the takeaways in terms of there's so much more to do, I think, around women embracing and being courageous and going for a diagnosis, not accepting the first potential conversation they have with a professional, that you wanted to pursue something and having the courage to go, actually, I can ask for a second opinion. I can keep trying. I can know myself, and understanding yourself has a massive impact of how you see the world, isn't it? But also that element of the openness you have and the openness you need to have as a manager to understand who you're working with, to understand your team, to be able to put yourself aside to go, let me know how you function, let me know how you work. What is it that I need to be aware of that may be more challenging to you? And therefore helps everybody else feel more at ease and more accepted regardless of it.
I think I could also say, be kind to yourself. But what I would say is, if you've got ADHD, being kind to yourself is really, really hard. So I think I would actually reframe it slightly and say that you are all of who you are. And if you think that you are carrying the burden of being somewhat different in some way as your perception of who you are and how you are, consider looking at whether or not you are neurodivergent in some way, because ultimately, if you are, that will be the point where you can start being kind to yourself. From my experience, until you've got that diagnosis, it's so much easier to say be kind to yourself than the reality of being kind to yourself. What you're doing with the diagnosis is saying, I now understand why I am as I am. Therefore, you get the self-kindness as a consequence of that. but you can't make yourself be kind to yourself if you, in my experience, are living with undiagnosed ADHD.
But that's the thing, isn't it? It's about embracing who you are, the whole self, not trying to change who you are because it's impossible to, but actually doing it. But also surrounding from moments in your stories around surrounding people that could do what you couldn't do. So give advice, be supportive, notice things that could give you feedback that was authentic enough for you to absorb rather than reject. And be able to have that. And it's been a joy to be able to kind of get to know that part of yourself. And I think for our listeners, it would, hopefully it will just resonate to those who needs to resonate to, give people strength in order to go, that's me, I need to do something about it. But also for any women who's working with other women to recognize that some things are never said in a room, and therefore we need to be, I'm getting quite emotional, be so aware of the unspoken and the energy that women have around making things play out in a certain way in a room. And to be aware of it and say, therefore, act accordingly. So let us know how you think. If I'd love to hear from our listeners about your experience, how you're getting on, how ADHD has impacted your lives, and any kind of other tips that you've kind of want to share in the community, because we'd love to hear. So until next time, keep your voice high
and your standards higher.